endlessly fascinated by the paranormal. I love hearing about different people's experiences with the paranormal and learning about haunted places from all over the world. So I hope you find this as interesting as I do. Also, just a little warning before we get started. The second place, which is Ed Gein's farm, is a little bit disturbing and graphic. So skip out on that one if you're not into that sort of thing. First place that I'm going to be reading about is Alcatraz, the paranormal prison. On May 2nd, 1946, in what became known as the Battle of Alcatraz, 6 prisoners overpowered guards, stole their weapons, and try to escape from the prison on this isolated island in San Francisco Bay. But when they realized they were missing the key, they needed to flee into the recreation yard. They grew desperate, took captives, and started shooting. Over the next 48 hours, 2 prison officers were killed and 18 injured. 3 would-be escapees were shot to death in the utility corridor between cell blocks, the very spot that 36 years later, San Francisco radio anchor Ted Weigand was exploring with a psychic when he was overcome by a feeling of violence and evil. I got this tremendous feeling of anger, he told the Travel Channel. I felt this presence beneath us in the dirt where these 3 men had died. This is only one of many supernatural stories involving the so-called Rock, which has been a Civil War fortress, a bird sanctuary, and the birthplace of the American Indian Red Power movement, in addition to the brutal home for thousands of hardened convicts. Rejected as unmanageable by other prisons, these men were called the Incorrigibles, according to former inmate Leon Whitey Thompson. You step on a toe, it's gonna wind up in death. Many of these long-departed inmates are now said to be unruly spirits. A spectral Al Capone has been heard practicing his banjo in the shower room. He was a member of the prison band, the Rock Islanders. Mobster Alvin Creepy Carpus calls the bakery and kitchen home, while George Machine Gun Kelly has reportedly materialized in the chapel. But the most haunted spot in the prison, according to many paranormal investigators, is D Block, the site of the infamous 1946 escape attempt, and of the island's best spooky story. Though the tale seems apocryphal, it's too good not to mention. A prisoner locked in cell 14D, one of the whole cells, supposedly screamed that someone else was in the dark, cramped space with him. When guards finally opened the door, they found him dead, strangulation marks from a spectral attacker on his neck. This little setback did not, however, prevent the late prisoner's ghost from showing up for roll call that night. Unlike so many haunted places, Alcatraz doesn't commercially capitalize on its reputation. In fact, the National Park Service calls the spook stories flights of fancy, as does the island's official tour website. There are no authenticated cases of ghost sightings by any of Alcatraz's residents over the years. Whether they were soldiers, prisoners, correctional officers, family members, or park rangers, the site reads, "But how would you authenticate a ghost sighting anyway?" And former prisoner Thompson, for his part, believes the hype. "This island is haunted," he said. "It is the island of the damned." That's pretty crazy. Personally, I have been to Alcatraz a few times. I've done both the day and the night tour, and it's pretty creepy. I will say that. Especially the night tour, that was really creepy. And the way I felt just being there. I don't even know how to describe it. It was weird. If you have not visited Alcatraz, I would highly recommend it. It's very interesting. The next place I'm going to read about is the Psycho House, or Ed Gein's farm. Somewhere in the Plainfield, Wisconsin cemetery lies an unmarked grave belonging to the man who, thanks to his Hollywood influence, may be America's most infamous serial killer. In the same burial ground lies what remains of the women he dug up in the 50s and turned into a perverse variety of handicrafts. Not surprisingly, the place is said to be haunted by the restless soul of one of the fiend's victims, unnamed in death as in life, prowling the lonely graves. In November 1957, Plainfield was shaken to its core after 58-year-old Bernice Warden, owner of the local hardware store, disappeared. Her son told the local sheriff that he'd found blood in the store and that a 51-year-old local handyman named Ed Gein had recently come in looking for antifreeze. movies, anatomy books, and detective magazines that Gein read by kerosene lamps. There were also human heads, one belonging to Mary Hogan, who had run a Plainfield tavern and had mysteriously disappeared in 1954. In the end, the remains of 11 women were discovered in the house. Two of them, Hogan and Warden, Gein claimed to have shot to death. 9 had been, he said, unearthed from local graves. Many of them had been tanned, as with taxidermy, their flesh used by Gein as garments. The only immaculate part of the dwelling was the nailed-shut room that had belonged to Gein's mother, Augusta. The fanatically religious woman had subjected her unstable son to ceaseless rants about the evils of women. Her alcoholic husband, George, died in 1940, followed by Gein's brother, Henry, under mysterious circumstances in 1944, leaving Gein to share the house with his mommy, the love of his life. But when Augusta, too, died in 1945, Gein found himself alone. Well, almost. The necrophiliac bachelor started digging up graves, using the remains of female bodies for company. He dressed in women's clothes, some fashioned from corpses, wishing that he had been born a woman. His mother had prayed for a daughter. Gein's oblivious neighbors found him mostly harmless. Ed Gein babysat for me once for about an hour, local resident Mrs. George Foster told Life. Just sat there, ate peaches, and watched TV. The locals did, however, acknowledge that he was odd. He talked obsessively, for instance, about crime and women. Former girlfriend Adeline Watkins said, We discussed every murder we heard about. Eddie explained the mistakes the murderer made. Declared insane in 1958, Gein died of cancer at age 77 in Mendota Mental Health Institute. But his perverse legacy endures, having inspired some of the greatest horror films ever made, among them the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Silence of the Lambs, and a little-known classic called Deranged. But the most enduring product of the Gein legend began in 1959, when writer Robert Bloch published a potboiler called Psycho, which Alfred Hitchcock turned into the classic 1960 film. In it, Norman Bates says the character based on Gein says a boy's best friend is his mother. Damn, what a psycho. To the side, it says, opposite page, Ed Gein's filthy kitchen, where, among other horrors, a chair was found that had been reupholstered in human skin. 3 more were eventually discovered, a study in contrast, above the tiny room that belonged to the ghoul's beloved mother. first version of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And James Gum, aka Buffalo Bill, in the silent